Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is The Current Podcast.
We will build here at home stronger industries, nation-building infrastructures, and millions of more homes for Canadians. We will protect what matters most, our people, our communities, and our sovereignty. And we will empower Canadians by making life more affordable, creating new career opportunities, and ensuring every generation can get ahead.
Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne yesterday tabled the Liberals' first budget since the spring election and the first budget in more than 18 months. It promises $141 billion in new spending, saying it will be a catalyst for growth. And it projects a $78 billion deficit. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre responded in the House.
Our party wanted an affordable budget for an affordable life. And on behalf of all the Canadians who can no longer afford to eat, heat, or house themselves because of Liberal inflation, we Conservatives cannot support this costly Liberal budget.
In fact, none of the other parties say they're ready to support it either. There is one outlier, Conservative MP Chris D'Entremont, who crossed the floor yesterday to join the Liberal caucus, which may help the minority government inch toward the number of votes it needs to pass the budget and avoid triggering an election. There's a lot going on. Our national affairs panel is here to sift through it all. Rosemary Barton is CBC's chief political correspondent. Stephanie Levitz is a senior reporter with the Globe and Mail's Ottawa bureau. And Ryan Tumulty is a political reporter at the Toronto Star. Good morning to you all.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Stephanie, let me begin with you. This budget, even before it was tabled yesterday, was being sold as a generational budget. Has it delivered on that promise that Mark Carney made?
If we're talking about generational insofar as it might take generations for its impact to be felt, it could very well be the case. I mean, the government is really hoping to juice the private sector here with a lot of the measures that it introduced yesterday. And it very well may be that new companies will start up, existing companies will expand, small businesses will pop up across the country, that $50 billion in infrastructure funding means new roads and highways and airports and all of those things. But those all take time. And Mr. Carney, he headed into the Liberal leadership race, the subsequent election, saying he had a plan. He was going to give Canadians a plan. And I wonder if all along the plan, what Canadians might have heard of, we're going to do something now, he meant a plan, which is I'll figure out how to get it done soon enough.
And Rosie, so what stands out for you in this budget? You've covered many of them, but what's really the hallmark for you here?
I think Steph is right. It is a budget that tells Canadians there's a plan for the economy that may or may not pan out in the not too distant future. But I think it is also a market shift from Justin Trudeau's Liberal government. This is not in the same realm at all. That doesn't mean that some of the programs that were put in place by the previous Prime Minister aren't sticking around, like the Canada Child Benefit, the Canada Disability Benefit, daycare, all those things. But there's also a real attempt here to shift away from social programs to create industrial policy, tax incentives, as Steph said, to try and attract private investment. There are also cuts, which is not something we saw much of over the past decade. Now, is there enough being cut? We'll see. It's about $60 billion they're hoping over 5 years, and that includes the public service and public sector that is going to shrink by 10%. So it is, for as much as the Conservatives say, these are the same old Liberals, sure, some of the people are the same, but there is a shift in approach to the economy and the country. Whether that's enough to deal with all that we're grappling with, I'm not sure.
So, Ryan, let's talk with all that we're grappling with, because it can be best described as a financial pickle that this country is in. Is there stuff in this budget? As Steph says, there's a plan, there's a long game here, but is there stuff in this budget that meets this moment now?
Yeah, I mean, in this budget, I wouldn't say that there is something, some sort of magic silver bullet here that will solve the trade war with the U.S. I'm not sure there is a magic silver bullet that exists anywhere that the government could have pulled off in this moment. There is support for industry that was announced over the summer. There is support for training programs. There is a recognition that things have to change. But what I think is interesting about this budget is it is about the long term. This is a minority government. This is a government that could face an election, potentially in a few days' time, but also more likely within a year. And it's not full of the kind of shiny baubles that sometimes get put into budgets to attract voter attention. It is about long-term change to this country, big investments, growing the economy over time. I don't know that the average voter gets excited about a capital cost allowance and a one-year tax write-off. But that is the kind of stuff that is going to help businesses grow and help sustain the economy and pivot it away from the U.S. over the long term.
So, Rosie, let's talk about the short term, because yesterday, just as the budget was being tabled in the subsequent hours, we got news that Chris d'Entremont was joining the Liberal caucus from the Conservatives, won in the election by only about 1,000 votes. The Liberals are now short 2 votes to pass this budget. How's it looking for them to get those votes?
Well, it's not looking terrible. And I would also say I'm not sure that the floor crossing is over. There are all sorts of people buzzing around last night and even this morning that there are other people who aren't thrilled with where the Conservative Party is right now. We'll see whether or not that happens, right? Floor crossing is temperamental at best. So whether they can talk people off the ledge or whether it manifests, I don't know. So let's say that doesn't happen, which could get the Liberals to a magical majority. If that doesn't happen, I do think that the NDP is still the government's best bet. They will allow their MPs to abstain. There are things in here. While the cuts are not great for the NDP to support, there are things in here that the NDP would like. And there are even targeted things for MPs in particular. Don Davies, the interim leader, mentioned a Filipino community center to be built in his riding where the Lapu-Lapu tragedy happened. Those are the kinds of things that get people thinking about whether or not this is good for their community and makes sense. The Conservatives aren't going to vote for it. The Bloc Québécois seems very unlikely to. But can the Liberals muster up a couple of votes? I would say that's probably true.
And Stephanie, just sticking with the floor crossing, as Rosie says, there's a possibility there may be others. No party leader likes when someone leaves their caucus. How worrying is the move by d'Entremont and potentially others for Pierre Poilievre, who has a leadership vote to contend with come the new year?
Isn't this a version of a leadership vote in and of itself, right? It speaks to the ongoing stressors within his party. And I think, a lot of the questions Conservatives keep asking themselves, which is how do we win the next election? And definitely, a lot of frustration inside that caucus since the election. There hasn't been enough work done to think about that, to think about what do they need to do? How do they need to pivot? How could they adjust their messaging while staying true to their ideology? But it also remains true that as much as many Conservatives talk about a big blue tent, there are factions in that tent. They don't agree on everything. And that's okay. They don't have to. But if Mr. Poilievre can't find a way to reconcile all of those different voices inside his caucus, this could be potentially very dangerous for his future as leader of the party.
And Ryan, Poilievre is saying, the deficit is way too big. We expected him to say that. He will continue to hammer the Liberals over that. And he says that the Conservatives will put forward an amendment to the budget. What are they hoping to achieve here?
The amendment to the budget is part of the standard operating practice of Parliament. This is what happens after a budget gets presented. They will put forward their version. Their version is them putting down stakes. It is them putting a confidence vote on the table because it will suggest that the government's, fiscal policy is terrible. And it is them trying to say, this is what we would do differently. I don't think it's going to have much in the way of detail. The Conservative proposal was to keep the deficit low or lower than it is now, to also cut a lot of taxes, which cuts a lot of revenue. And they weren't really specific about what more spending cuts they would do to get down to a $42 billion deficit. That is $40 billion that they're talking about. So, that amendment is a marker. It is part of the parliamentary process, and it's what the Conservatives would be advocating for if this Parliament falls.
Rosie, for regular Canadians, struggling with the affordability issues, food, housing, all of those things. They want to see some relief now. We have heard that from Canadians from coast to coast to coast over the past several months. Is there something that the Liberals could say, hey, here's what's in it for you now. Here's how we're going to help?
I think the problem with this budget a little bit is that all the things that they could point to for Canadians who are struggling right now are things that have already happened or that they've already announced. The affordability measures, the middle class tax cut, let's not forget that happened, shortly after the election. They got rid of the carbon tax. They guaranteed the national food program for kids would stick around. These are all measures that might help Canadians, that maybe are already helping Canadians. The housing program, which is big, but it's going to take a while to get houses built. So I think that fundamentally speaks to maybe the other overarching problem with the budget, and that is a communications problem. It's pretty complicated, right? And because there's no, as everyone was saying, no baubles here, no things for people to grab hold of, it does become hard to convince Canadians that it is doing anything for them. It may, again, in the long term, shift the economy, preserve jobs, shore up the domestic economy, create new sectors where people can get jobs. But it is hard to see that in the document right now, and I think even harder to communicate.
So, Stephanie, why not? Why wouldn't the Liberal government put some of those baubles or things that ordinary Canadians could latch onto and say, hey, here's my government helping me in this moment?
Mr. Carney has, made it clear previously that he thought government spending was out of control and that the government wasn't doing what he believed the government ought to be doing, which is to generate growth in the economy, not just paper it over, I guess, with some kind of stopgap measure for Canadians, as much as that would be appreciated. It seems as though, through this budget, it's perhaps like a federal fiscal policy version of elbows up, which is to say, he's going to have to try to convince Canadians, look, this is how we make things better in the long term. I know you're feeling anxious. I know you are worried. I know that things are hard at home, which is something that the finance minister alluded to in his speech, or said directly in his speech yesterday. But it's going to take time to get us out of this. So here's how I'm going to do it. And maybe that'll be enough for Canadians, right? Maybe they just feel comforted. They will feel comforted thinking that, okay, someone's in charge. They have a handle on this. They'll figure it out. And in the meantime, I'm willing to suck it up to a degree. And I think sometimes that's why, the government likes to use this like post-war analogy, because they're really trying to get Canadians there to say we all have to sacrifice as a nation. That may be to some degree true. And to some degree, there are things that are outside of the government's control to change, like the price of fruit and vegetables at this moment in time, right? But, on the opposite side of the aisle, you have the Conservative Party, internal drama notwithstanding, making the very cogent argument that young people are hooped. And it's hard for them to see 15 years down the road when there's going to be a new road and a new mine and a new everything. But what about their today? And that still remains a salient political argument.
Ryan, let's talk about the sacrifices, because the other side of this budget, of course, are cuts. It cuts nearly 40,000, proposes to cut nearly 40,000 civil service jobs over the next 5 years, 16,000 of those this fiscal year. What are the other cuts Canadians will notice?
I think it remains to be seen, if Canadians will notice those public service cuts. I mean, those public servants were doing things. They were providing some level of service to Canadians, and there will be less of that. This government's relying a lot on the idea that, you can get productivity gains from AI. You can, get other technological gains that will mean that those public servants cuts won't matter. I'm not sure that's going to be the case, and I'm not sure we'll know if that's the case, until we get down the road. I mean, just to use one example, the CRA, right? People were dealing with hour-long waits, day-long waits on phones for the CRA. The CRA has a chatbot that gets things wrong most of the time. So the magic idea that AI will fix things is embedded across this budget, and I'm not sure it's necessarily going to pay off. I'm not necessarily sure that there are direct things that Canadians will miss in this budget, but the government is taking a gamble that they can take 40,000 civil servants out of the system and not have a big impact.
Rosie, the thing about budgets is they're always a moment in time with projections of what's ahead. We live in very unstable times, especially when it comes to economic issues. How much do the plans laid out in this budget depend on the economy staying steady, or at least within the lanes that the government thinks it's going to?
Well, like a lot of budgets, this one has an upside and a downside scenario where the upside, obviously, things get better. The tariff war goes away, trade returns to some semblance of normalcy. The downside, none of that happens. And we have to soldier on with this plan and ongoing pressures for a much longer period of time. I think the reality is that this budget has really done all it can domestically. It is not going to replace what we are losing through tariffs and through the United States and the general upheaval of the world right now. But it has done all it can here inside the Canada's borders. The problem is that Mr. Carney was not just elected on that promise. He was elected on a promise to handle this stuff. And while he had made some inroads on that trip to Asia to try and start some free trade negotiations with other countries, those talks with Donald Trump are still not going anywhere. And those sectors that are hardest hit, softwood, steel, aluminum, are suffering in real time. So again, this comes back to this issue of time. How long are Canadians willing to wait to see some of the payoff that the Prime Minister has talked about and was elected on?
One of the things, Steph, that the government can control in terms of, is the nation building projects. We're still waiting for the second phase of that. I think the Prime Minister said sometime around the Grey Cup, which is the middle of this month. There's money in there for that. Is that going to be a key focus of the government? Say, look, as Rosie said, we can control what we can control, and here's one of the things we can control, the nation building projects. Is that where they're going to harness their efforts and focus now?
I mean, it's a great question. And I think, this nation had a sad wake-up call not that long ago, and we pinned all our hopes on the Jays winning the World Series, and then they didn't. So using another sporting event as a
still
deadline
sad about
may
that,
break
Steph.
our hearts, And the challenge is, I go back to sort of what I said off the top, right? These are generational investments. All of this stuff takes time. And it is all fine and well to say, yes, we are going to expedite major project X for natural resources. There is some degree of national consensus on needing to build bigger things quickly in this country. But the debate over natural resource development, climate change, the future of the sector, that's all still very live in people's minds. And so you can focus your energy there. But I would submit that a lot of folks are still waiting for the climate piece and wondering what happened to that and what happened to that ambition.
And Ryan, during this time, Steph keeps talking about, rightly so, the long-term plans. But last time I checked, governments aren't elected for a long time. They have to be able to keep the confidence of the Canadian people. How wobbly is this at the end of the day?
Yeah, I'll be interested to see how the public reacts to this. I'm sure we'll have polls in the days ahead. But, if I think back to the sort of the final days of the Trudeau administration, sort of the last thing that the Trudeau government did was the fall economic statement in December of last year. And it was full of baubles. It was GST holidays. It was, I think, a $200 check or a $250 check. And Canadians didn't really appreciate it. Yeah. They didn't enjoy it. They were looking for they saw a long-term fight in front of them. They saw a serious problem in front of them with the way Trump was talking. And they were looking for some serious response. And so maybe this plays a little better than we all think. Okay, we'll leave it there. Thanks to all three of you. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
It's Rosemary Barton, Stephanie Levitz, and Ryan Tumulty, our National Affairs panel.
You've been listening to The Current Podcast. My name is Matt Galloway. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you soon.